Greetings, beasts of Nurgle, and welcome to Codex Compliant.
Let's get back to our roots and do some good old-fashioned Codex episodes, starting with this saucy little minx right here.
The one we're covering today is 1999's Codex Chaos Space Marines, a book that's notable in that it's not the only 3rd edition Chaos Codex. During Warhammer 40k's 3rd edition, a couple of codices received a 2nd edition that amended some minor issues, and 2 more were replaced with entirely new books before the edition was over. One of those was Chaos Space Marines. So this means the one we're covering was replaced just 3 years after its release, which, considering the longer than average life of 3rd edition and the fact that codices from this era could last through several editions anyway, makes it particularly short-lived for its time. It's also the one with Doom Rider in it, so it's the best one. That's just how it is. You cannot disagree. This is not a democracy.
The first 3rd edition Codex Chaos Space Marines was written by Jervis Johnson and the cover art was by Wayne England, featuring a close-up of a Chaos Marine who is oddly smooth and has the trademark Wayne England earrings. I kinda like him. As an early 3rd edition codex, it's not the most fluff-heavy, although there's enough in there to give you a good idea of the faction. I'm particularly fond of this quote from the back of the book attributed to the first Book of Abomination. "The strong will always enslave the weak. Where the strong make their own fate, the weak bow their heads and succumb. There are few who are strong, and many are their enemies, and the greatest of those enemies is the false emperor of mankind. Destroy the followers of the false emperor and revel in their cries for mercy. Their weakness can only be eradicated by their sacrifice to the gods of chaos." Which, before you've even opened the book, alludes to Chaos Marines having a little more philosophy to them than just, being evil for the sake of it whilst cosplaying as a bunch of war dukes. Not a great or original philosophy, sure, it's just generic anime villain stuff, but it's something.
As a side note, I don't remember if we've ever mentioned it before, but the 3rd ed codices have little quotes on their spines related to the faction. So Space Marines are, "and they shall know no fear." Orcs are, "here we go, here we go, here we go." And both versions of Chaos have "death to the false emperor." Which is a cute feature of these books, and only mildly let down by how much they don't line up on a shelf and that they keep changing the font. The introduction to the book gives a brief overview of where Chaos Marines come from. You know, Horus Heresy, the Traitor Marines retreating to the Eye of Terror afterwards, all that good stuff. It also said almost half of the Space Marine legions of that time sided with Horus, something also said in the 3rd edition Space Marine Codex.
And given that by 3rd edition we knew that there were 20 legions originally, 9 loyalists, 9 traitor, and 2 that were wiped from the records, you could interpret as them saying that at least one of the lost legions was still around during the heresy, and that they were loyalists.
Or it could just be a product of inaccurate Imperial bookkeeping.
There's a nice short bit of fiction from the perspective of a possessed Chaos Marine named Beckanor. He's only been host to a demon for a few months, and as such they're not fully entwined. He's not even yet allowed to know its name, he just knows it as the Emissary. But his guest is painfully reshaping his body to suit its whims and issuing him orders. Kill, maim, destroy. There's also a little in-universe breakdown of the traitor legions by Scribe Adolphus. What's contained there mostly lines up with the modern iterations, although it's missing a lot of later details, such as the tale of the Death Guard's fleet dropping out of the warp and getting all destroyer-plagued being there, but Typhon's role in it is absent. However, other things are quite different.
For example, the Emperor's children weren't present for the Battle of Isfahan III, and were instead one of the forces sent to Isfahan V to stop Horus, only turning to the War Master's cause after meeting him to parley, and being seduced to the ruinous powers by the decadence offered to them. I think this line means they fell to chaos mostly via the medium of edging. The Alpha Legion were also presented a little differently, with their covert nature seeming to be something that only appeared once the heresy was over, rather than something they always just kinda did. Oh, and there's no description of the word bearers in this section at all, for some reason, which is an odd omission since their Primarch, Lorgar, was stated to be the first Primarch that fell to chaos in the 2nd edition Codex, so it's not like their importance wasn't established. It feels like something Jervis probably only noticed after it was published and would have been quite annoyed about.
On to the actual rules. To illustrate how the Spikey lads differed from their Imperial cousins, let's see how a basic Chaos Space Marine squad was compared to a tactical squad of the same time. Stats wise, they were nearly identical, costing the exact same points but with one extra point of leadership, presumably there to balance out the fact they didn't have the auto regrouping rule Imperial Marines had. Plus it makes sense since most Chaos Marines are old veterans and a leadership of 9 is what veteran Space Marines had. The regular dudes could also choose to have a bolt pistol and chainsword rather than a bolter, and one could take a plasma pistol. Plus autocannons, it's Chaos, they gotta have their autocannons. To move more broadly onto the army list, for HQ choices you had your Chaos Lord, who could have a retinue either made of veterans or one of the 4 god-specific units, and he could also be upgraded into a Chaos Sorcerer Lord if he was feeling saucy, with Demon Princes, Sorcerers, and Greater Demons rounding out the HQ slots. Elites were Terminators, Veterans, and Possessed, with Khorne Berserkers, Plague Marines, and Thousand Suns. Troops were your basic Chaos Marines, Demon Packs, and Nurglings. Fast Attack was Demonic Beasts, Demonic Cavalry, Bikes, Juggers, and Raptors. Heavy Support was Havocs, Noise Marines, Obliterators, Dreadnoughts, Predators, and Land Raiders, and finally Rhinos as dedicated transports.
Now, I know all of that went by in one big blur of names and stats, so let's pick apart a few notable things in there. There's a few units that you could only have one of because of their canonical rarity, those being Obliterators and Raptors. So throw out any really fun ideas of making an army themed around those using this book. The latter's entry explicitly states that jump packs were a rarity in the Heresy, and so that's why not many Chaos Marines have them. Something presumably retconned, since in the Horus Heresy game you can just take a whole army of jump pack troops if you really want. They don't seem particularly rare anymore. At least according to the people on Blue Sky who actually play Horus Heresy, who responded to us asking if you can still do that in the current game. If we're wrong, blame them. Also, Dreadnoughts were not elites like the Loyalist ones, but were instead heavy support, and came with a special rule where you must roll a d6 when you try and shoot with one, with 1s and 6s resulting in them possibly getting too mad to fire and just charging the enemy, or shooting their guns even more wildly.
It was also possible to make Berserkers, Plague Marines, Thousand Suns, or Noise Marines into a troops selection by having a Lord with the appropriate Chaos mark. And they could still be taken as elites like that too, allowing you to fit a whopping 9 squads of them into an army. And since each squad of Berserkers could be up to 20 strong, and a Lord could have a retinue of 9 more, that means that you could run an army of 189 Khorne Berserkers and a Lord, although it would be pushing 4,000 points to do so. Another thing you might have noticed is that since Chaos Demons didn't start getting their own codices until 4th edition, they were thrown in here, and had to scrunch up a bit and share generic stat lines so they wouldn't dominate the list, with some minor changes being made to the entries depending on what kind of demon they were. So demon packs could be Bloodletters, Plague Bearers, Demonettes or Horrors, demonic beasts could be Flesh Hounds, Fiends or Flamers, and demonic cavalry could be Demonettes riding steeds, Plague Bearers riding beasts, or Discs of Tzeentch. And then there's Nurglings, which were just Nurglings, although they were unique in that they were a demon unit that didn't need to be summoned. Because yeah, even before they became their own army, you couldn't just start with these on the table. Demons had to start in reserve and be summoned into the physical realm by rolling a d6 each turn after the first, with the roll being easier for certain kinds of demon depending on certain factors. For example, you'd get +1 to your dice roll for Tzeentch demons if any psychic powers were used that turn. Then you used an ordnance plate and scatter dice to see exactly where they appeared, which, as people who enjoy any appearance of a scatter dice, we approve of.
Greater Demons had a different set of summoning rules entirely, as they would possess a character model to manifest on the board, with you rolling a d6 for each character model in your army from turn 2 onwards, and the first time you roll a 6, your character is gone, and in their place is a rather large, and probably rather angry demon. So there's an element of gambling there, as you couldn't guarantee where the demon would appear or how useful the model possessed would have been. Also, unlike the 2nd edition Codex, there was no way to run a demon world or cultist army in this one, presumably annoying a lot of Chaos players at the time. which is a pity, but GW will always find a way to mess with your fun-themed lists whenever a new edition comes out. This is just the nature of things.
Looking at the Wargear/Chaos gifts, there was a few little things of note in there. The spiky bits Chaos Marines adorned themselves with allowed them to re-roll one hit in close combat, although since most Chaos Marines are quite spiky already, one can only assume that you'd want to model them as particularly spiky if you were taking this upgrade. It also says that the spikes on Chaos Marine's armour may in fact be there to praise some minor Chaos powers. Powers that are not particularly subtle references to Michael Moorcock, Frank Frazetta and Brian Ansell. Which is pretty fun, especially the Moorcock one, considering that there is quite a lot about Chaos that is, borrowed from Moorcock's writing. Nurgle Infestation covered a tank in so much ooze and nurglings that it gained +1 armour on all sides, up to a maximum of 14, so a 14 armour Predator was possible. A Destroyer was a vehicle upgrade that basically turned a tank into a Combine Harvester, but it harvested people. The Axe of Khorne is a mighty Axe of Khorne, suffused with chaotic power and death, and on a hit roll of 6 allowed for an additional attack to be made. And if that second roll was also a 6, then you got another attack, and so on. Meaning that if you were staggeringly lucky, it was possible for a single model to murder, say, an entire 32 model squad of Hormagaunts in a single round. Astronomically unlikely, yes, but technically possible.
A model with Nurgle's Rot could spread it to any other model, friend or foe, that the bearer was in base-to-base contact with, on a 6+, causing a wound that bypassed armour saves. A Beast of Nurgle was essentially a large wet puppy. The Collar of Khorne nullified psychic powers and was presumably some kind of kink thing. And there were the banners for each of the 4 gods, +1 for Chaos Undivided, that all did something fluffy. Like the Slanesh one that smelled nice and musky and thus made units immune to fear. I mean, that's not the most accurate way to describe what it did, but that's the description we're going to go with. The gifts pages also had the psychic powers in there, although the only one we'll mention is Fleshy Curse. Not because Fleshy Curse is a fun thing to say, although it definitely is, but because it was a power that allowed a sorcerer to turn an enemy model into a chaos spawn. You just had to provide an appropriate model. In-game, a spawn had the same stat line as a Beast of Nurgle, if you were curious.
Now we come to the special characters. Abaddon the Despoiler was obviously there, able to lead a Chaos army of 2,000 points or more. He was a bit of a beast of a melee fighter with his auto-wounding, auto-vehicle penetrating demon sword, Terminator armour with a 4+ invulnerable save, and the Talon of Horus, a lightning claw that inspired fear in Imperial units, minusing 1 from their leadership. Unless they were Blood Angels who got a +1 leadership around it, since it was the weapon used to kill their dad and they're still kinda mad about it. Ahriman could be included in any Chaos army that had a squad of 1,000 Suns in it, and the best part about his entry is this little bit listing his crimes, and I must know what the lesser offences are. Has he also been doing a bit of, like, littering and graffiti on the side?
Khan the Betrayer could show up in an army with Berserkers in it and always hit in melee on a 2+ regardless of his opponent's weapon skill, and would just kill whatever was near him regardless of allegiance. So it's probably best not to put anything too valuable too close to him. Or maybe just don't put anything near him at all. Fabius Bile was pretty neat since his stats were randomly generated each game, so he could either be absolutely amazing for his points or quite terrible. He could also have a retinue of enhanced warriors who are kind of a work in progress, so have the potential to just keel over dead at the start of the game. And then we come to the 2 extra special ones.
Cypher, the Fallen Dark Angel, was there, able not only to be taken by a Chaos army, but by an Imperial Guard army too, counting as an elite's choice in either. He could take a squad of Fallen Angels with him, was really hated by the Dark Angels, caused discord in any non-Fallen squad he joined, and could be whisked away by the Ruinous Powers should you land a shot on him that would kill him, denying you your victory points. Always liked Cypher, although he's definitely one of those characters that's less interesting the more we learn about him. He's all about the mystery, you know?
And then we get to Doom Rider. I'm sorry, I meant Doom Rider! Who is a lot. Doom Rider is a marine who has ascended to demonhood and rides his bike nimbly enough that it counts as a jetpack. He's summoned onto the battlefield just like a regular demon, but at the end of each turn that he's in play, you roll a d6. On a 1, he just poofs back into the Immaterium, gone for the rest of the game. This could be the same turn he appears in. As the rule says, he comes, he goes. Doom Rider is mostly just a subject of memes these days, since he's not been playable for like over 20 years at this point, but behind the inherent silliness of him, we can't help but like him and the randomness of his summoning rules. It feels really fluffy for a Slaaneshi speed demon, and it's kind of the stuff we miss from the modern game, if we're honest. Also, the invocation to summon him includes the words throbbing, gushing, orgasmic, and titillate, so you know it's properly Slaaneshi.
Finally, the colour section of the book has all the usual stuff: example armies, tactics, colour schemes, conversions, etc. But the models are all holdovers from 2nd edition, since Chaos wouldn't get a range overhaul until later in 3rd edition. This means you can play a fun game of spot the model from the 2nd edition Codex. Often they've had touch-ups like this Iron Warrior who's had his gun repainted, but it's definitely the same guy, and we found him. There's also the old Chaos tank conversions, and they're just so much, and they're perfect, and you gotta love them. Plus, sometimes I forget that there was a time when it was not unusual for 40k demons to be on square bases, even on studio armies. On a personal note, it's also neat to see this kind of plastic Chaos Marine feature so prominently, mostly because you don't tend to see them around much these days since they weren't around super long and aren't particularly good, but I'm fairly sure that a box of these were the first 40k models I ever bought, so I can't help but have a bit of a soft spot for them.
As we mentioned at the start, this codex was replaced by a very well regarded 2nd version a few years later, often referred to as the 3.5 Chaos Codex, and is considered by many to be one of the best codices ever released. Much like the rest of the later 3rd edition codices, it was much more detailed, had more options, and had a lot more fluff to inspire you than the early 3rd edition book did. This means that it often feels like the first 3rd edition Chaos Codex gets overlooked, purely because it's the worst of the two 3rd edition Chaos Codexes. Which, okay, now that I say that out loud, it makes total sense.
But that doesn't mean it's bad, it's just very much of a particular time period, being more of an elaboration of the gets you by list in the main 3rd edition rulebook than a major overhaul. And personally, I kinda like the early stripped down 3rd edition codices. They may be limited, but they're to the point, they only contain what you need to know, and so it's easy to find what you need in game, and they have tight lists devoid of the type of bloat that many modern factions do. And of course, when you have shelves full of these books because you've made the poor decision to dedicate your career to talking about them, you can't help but appreciate the straightforward nature of these simpler tomes.
Also, again, this one has Doom Rider in it, so even if it objectively isn't as good as 3.5, it is still the best one.
It doesn't have to make sense. It's our video. Hello there, thank you very much for watching. If you like this video, then why not make it official with an actual like, maybe leave us a comment telling us your favourite Chaos Legion, or if you're new here, then maybe consider subscribing. We've got over 50 videos in this series and are trying to get back to releasing one new one each month again, so more are on the way soon. If you really like what we do, then could we perhaps tempt you to take a look at our Patreon at patreon.com/snipeandwib, which for as little as $1 a month gives you early access to videos, previews, and of course, your name scrolling past in the end credits. The money raised there makes these videos possible and is greatly appreciated. Also, my voice is apparently dying, so goodbye everybody. I'm gonna go lie down.
Greetings, beasts of Nurgle, and welcome to Codex Compliant.
I burped.